Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I should have seen the eviction coming. The notice arrived on a Wednesday morning in February, folded neat and merciless, slipped beneath my door like a knife under the ribs, and I'll admit it, I deserved it. I was months behind on rent, working endless shifts as a line cook at a greasy downtown diner. The kind of job where the smell of frying oil clings to you long after you've clocked out. The kind of job where you survive, not live. My landlord, Mr. Garrison, didn't even bother with eye contact when I opened the door, just handed me the notice and muttered, "You've got 2 weeks." He was a stocky man in his 50s, khakis and that same faded blue polo he always wore, his cologne sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. The sound of his limp fading down the hallway stayed with me, even after he disappeared. 2 weeks, that was all. Packing should have kept me busy, but each box I taped shut only fed my anger. I'd lived there for years, kept quiet, never caused trouble, and when I finally hit hard times, when I needed just a sliver of understanding, Garrison slammed the door in my face. The new place I found was smaller, darker, a cave with peeling walls and a radiator that banged like it hated being alive. It didn't matter. I was already plotting revenge. It started with a trip to the hardware store. Nothing flashy. Caulk, a putty knife, rubber gloves, harmless items on their own. Then I hit the grocery store for cheap fish, milk, and eggs. My pulse hammered in my ears the whole time, but I told myself it wasn't a crime, just payback. Garrison deserved to suffer the way he made me suffer. I waited until 3 in the morning. The building was silent, only the occasional groan of pipes in the walls. Kneeling on sore knees, I pried loose baseboards with the putty knife. The wood cracked softly, each sound echoing too loud in the empty room. I stuffed raw fish deep inside the gaps, pushing with a bent wire hanger until the stench clung to my hands like rot. In the bathroom, I poured milk behind the toilet tank and cracked eggs into the ventilation grate, yolk splattering like blood. Then I sealed everything back up, smoothing caulk lines until the baseboards looked untouched. The bleach burned my nostrils, but I kept scrubbing, erasing all evidence. By the time I was done, the place looked cleaner than when I'd moved in. It was 4 a.m. when I loaded the last box into my rusting Ford Ranger. My heart was pounding, but I told myself I'd won. In a week, when the smell hit, Garrison would tear the walls apart. It would cost him thousands. Maybe then, he'd think twice before tossing another tenant out. For the first few nights in my new apartment, I laughed to myself about it. Pictured his face when the stink set in. Pictured him gagging, cursing, tearing into drywall with sweaty fists. And then, 3 weeks later, the envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address. Just my name written in sharp black block letters. Inside was a single sentence. "I know what you did to apartment B." My blood went cold. Nobody knew. Not a soul. I hadn't told my buddy Craig. Not even as a joke over beers. It had been my secret, mine alone. The next day, another envelope slid under my door. This one held a photograph. Me, carrying boxes from Garrison's building. Timestamp, 3:07 a.m. The same night I'd done it. The photo was from across the street, but my face was clear under the streetlight. Someone had been there watching me. Attached was another typed note. "The smell started yesterday. Mr. Garrison is very upset." My first thought was Garrison himself. Maybe he'd tracked me down, trying to scare me. But no, he didn't know where I lived now. I hadn't left forwarding information. Besides, these notes didn't feel like him. Garrison was blunt, direct. These were deliberate, calculated, like someone savoring the game. That night, it escalated. At exactly 9 p.m., 3 sharp knocks rattled my door. I froze. The sound was so familiar. Garrison's knock. 3 heavy raps, then silence. I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty under the flickering fluorescent light. My heart drummed in my throat. I opened the door with the chain still on, just enough to peek. Nothing. Then I looked down. Another envelope. This one had my full name, middle initial and all. Inside were 3 more photos. Me at the hardware store, putty knife in hand. Me at the grocery store, fish in my basket. Me kneeling by the baseboard, pressing raw flesh into the walls. That last one nearly dropped me to my knees. It was taken from the bedroom doorway. Someone had been there, watching me, breathing in the same air while I worked, oblivious. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with a baseball bat across my lap, every light blazing, my ears tuned to every creak and murmur of the building. At 2 a.m., footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. My grip tightened on the bat, palms slick with sweat. Instead of knocking, I heard it, a slow scratching sound, fingernails dragging across the wood. The sound made my scalp prickle, made bile rise in my throat. It lasted 30 seconds, then silence, then laughter, soft, breathy, drifting down the stairwell like a ghost. When dawn finally broke, I found another photo slipped under the door. This one froze my veins solid. It was me, sleeping on my couch, taken 2 nights earlier, from my living room window. They had been watching me long before the first note, and I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. I didn't go to work the next day. Couldn't. My body felt hollow. My hands shook whenever I tried to do anything. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, the photo of me sleeping lying in front of me, like a threat I couldn't look away from. Whoever was doing this, they weren't just watching. They were inside my life, my home. By late afternoon, paranoia drove me out of the apartment. I got in my truck and drove across town to my old building, parking on the same street where that first photo had been taken. Workers in hazmat suits shuffled in and out of apartment B, carrying black bags and heavy equipment. A white van was parked out front, Clean Tech Restoration Services. Garrison must have hired them to gut the place. I sat there too long, staring. That's when the knock came. Not on my door this time, but on the passenger side window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman stood there, pale as chalk. Her hair pulled back so tightly it made her face look stretched. She was maybe mid-30s, dressed in a black pea coat even though the weather was warm. In her hand was a manila folder with my name scrawled across it. I locked the doors instantly. She just smiled at me through the glass, tapped the folder against the window, and mouthed the words, "Drive home. Check your bathroom mirror. Then come back here at midnight, if you want this to stop." Before I could respond, she dropped the folder on the hood of my truck and walked away, calm, silent. She disappeared around the corner without a backward glance. My heart was still hammering when I grabbed the folder. Inside were receipts, every item I'd bought that night, carefully printed and highlighted. But there were more. Receipts for surveillance equipment, industrial cleaners, even a storage unit rental in my name. I hadn't bought any of it. Still, the signature on the contract was mine, down to the loop of my initials. At the bottom of the stack was a key labeled Unit 39. I drove home, barely breathing, and in the bathroom, written across the mirror in smeared soap, were the words, "You're not the only one who can hide things in walls." The letters were still damp. Whoever had written them had been inside my apartment that day. I ripped the dresser from the bedroom wall, heart pounding, and hammered into the drywall. The stench hit immediately, rotting fish and something chemical, sour. Inside the cavity was a plastic bag, and in the bag, dozens of photographs. Not of me, of strangers, men, women, kids, all caught in their most private moments, sleeping, eating, walking down the street. Every photo taken from the shadows. At the bottom of the pile was a driver's license. A woman's face stared up at me. Same woman from the truck. But the name was different. Angela Morse, previous tenant. By midnight, I was parked outside my old building again, the folder and storage key on the seat beside me. My nerves screamed at me to drive away, to call the police, to do something. But I didn't move. And right on time, she appeared. Angela. She slid into the passenger seat, the smell of mothballs and something sweet and rotten filling the cab. Her smile was too wide, her teeth too white. "Angela Morse," I said, my voice cracking. She nodded, eyes glinting in the streetlight. "I lived in apartment B for years. Garrison evicted me too. Same reason, late rent." She leaned closer. "So I did what you did, only worse. Dead mice, sulfur. I wanted him to choke on the stench. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper." Angela pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A video began to play. Me, that night, kneeling by the baseboards, pressing fish into the walls. She'd recorded everything. "I've been watching ever since," she whispered, waiting for someone else to cross the line. "You're the third one." I shook my head, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. "What do you want?" She set the storage key on the dashboard. "The unit has everything you need. Cleaning supplies, equipment. You're going to fix what you did to Garrison's apartment, and you're going to pay for the restoration." Her smile widened, unnatural. "If you don't, the police will get these videos, along with ones I can fabricate." She wasn't bluffing. I could see it in her eyes. Calm, cold, predatory. The next week was hell. Under Angela's supervision, I cleaned every inch of apartment B. She had keys, had been slipping in and out of the building for years, living in the basement storage area no one checked. She directed me with surgical precision, showing me exactly where I'd hidden each piece of fish, each egg, each splash of milk, because she'd been there, watching, recording. The supplies from the storage unit were professional grade. She'd planned for this long before I came along. Every step I took, every wipe of the sponge, was documented with photos she demanded I take. She made me write a confession, too, one she kept locked away with the videos. The final bill from the restoration company drained my savings and maxed out my credit card. $2,700. And still, that wasn't enough. On the last night, as I scrubbed the floor until my fingers blistered, Angela crouched beside me. Her voice was soft, but it froze me in place. "You're lucky," she whispered. "The last tenant I caught refused to cooperate. His name was Bradley. He's in prison now, for crimes he never committed." She showed me an article on her phone. Photos, video stills, doctored, but flawless. Bradley smashing windows, breaking into apartments. It looked real, real enough to ruin him. When the work was done, when my bank account was empty and my pride burned to ash, Angela handed me one final envelope. Inside was a list of names. Every tenant in my new building, their apartment numbers, their daily routines. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "I'll be watching," she said as she slipped out of my truck. "Not just you, all of them. If anyone else crosses the line, you'll help me teach them a lesson. You're part of this now." And then she vanished into the night, like she'd never been there. That was months ago. I've moved twice since, but postcards still find me. No return address, just photos of apartment buildings I don't recognize. Last week my phone rang at 3 a.m., an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. At first, just breathing. Then her voice, calm, patient. "Someone in Columbus just got evicted. They seem angry. I might need you soon." I hung up, changed my number the next morning. But I know it doesn't matter. She'll find me. She always finds me. I sleep with the lights on now. Rent paid early. No complaints. No noise. Because I know what happens to people who fall behind. I know what happens when you think revenge is harmless. And I know she's out there, waiting, watching. The house smelled like vanilla candles and new carpet the moment Mrs. Brennan opened the door. October nights in the suburbs had that chill that settled into your bones, but inside it was warm and clean. almost sterile in its perfection. She wore a black cocktail dress with pearls, apologizing 3 times in the first minute for running late to some corporate event downtown. I had picked up babysitting jobs through a neighborhood app to cover college expenses, and this listing had looked simple enough. An 8-year-old boy, a newer development on the north side, and the promise of decent pay for just a few hours. The neighborhood was absurdly perfect. Identical lawns, SUVs parked in driveways, and a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Mrs. Brennan moved through the house like a whirlwind, her heels clicking against the polished floors. She pointed out emergency numbers on the stainless steel fridge, explained Oliva's bedtime routine, and checked her phone every few seconds. Oliva sat cross-legged in the living room, surrounded by a chaotic fortress of Legos, wearing dinosaur pajamas that made him look smaller than he was. His enormous brown eyes followed me briefly before he returned to building what looked like a space station made entirely of blue blocks. She showed me the house twice, the landline in the kitchen, the first aid kit under the bathroom sink, the spare key hidden under a decorative rock near the back door. "It looks like a real rock, but it's not," she said, laughing nervously. The house was massive compared to my family's 2-bedroom apartment. Cathedral ceilings, smart home lights, and every modern convenience I'd ever wanted, but also a sense of uncanny quiet that only grew after she left. By the time her car pulled out of the driveway, the house settled into silence. Only the click of Legos and the low hum of the heating system remained. Oliver and I spent the first hour building towers and knocking them down. Then we read books about construction vehicles until his eyelids drooped. By bedtime, he brushed his teeth without argument, chose a stuffed triceratops, and asked for 1 glass of water before drifting off. Finally, I had the house to myself. I collapsed on the massive couch with a bowl of microwave popcorn and scrolled through Netflix. The living room windows faced the backyard, which was dark except for the occasional motion sensor light flickering on when a cat passed by. Every house on the street was a mirror image of the next, flipped or rotated, turning the neighborhood into a confusing maze if you weren't paying attention. I settled on a true crime documentary, thinking about the irony when I heard the first noise around 10:15 p.m., a scraping sound, like someone had bumped into the garbage cans. I muted the TV, but the sound faded, leaving only silence. Probably a raccoon, I told myself. Then I heard it again, closer this time. From the back of the house near the kitchen, a deliberate, testing sound. Someone was at the sliding glass door. My heart thumped. I froze, listening. The motion sensor light flicked on outside, casting long shadows across the deck. That's when I saw him. A man in dark clothes, ski mask pulled low, crowbar in hand, crouched by the fake rock hiding the spare key. He lifted the rock, found the key, and moved toward the door with the ease of someone who had done this before. I pressed myself against the wall next to the refrigerator, trying to control my breathing. My phone with the smart home panic button was back in the living room. Moving would put me directly in his line of sight. The door clicked open, and he stepped inside, maybe 10 feet away. The crowbar tapped against his thigh, a rhythm that tightened my chest with every strike. He moved into the living room, rifling through drawers, muttering about a safe and jewelry. His voice was raspy, coated with smoke and bad habits, clearing his throat in a way that made me gag. I had seconds to decide. Oliver was upstairs, completely defenseless, and this man clearly assumed the house was empty. I grabbed a knife from the magnetic strip on the wall, the biggest one, and crept toward the stairs, using the muted TV to mask my steps. The intruder was now in the dining room, yanking cabinets open, smashing glassware. Shadows flickered across the walls, distorted by the TV light. My heart raced as I climbed the carpeted stairs 2 at a time. Oliver's door was cracked open. A nightlight cast a soft glow over him, sleeping with the triceratops clutched to his chest. I slipped inside, locked the door, and wedged a small desk chair under the doorknob. My mind raced through options. The landline was downstairs, the phone upstairs in the living room. Oliver had a toy phone, but it wouldn't do much against a real threat. Then I remembered Mrs. Brennan mentioning the mounted tablet in Oliver's room, a panic button connected to the home security system. My hand shook as I swiped the screen and found the red icon. Panic. I pressed it. The alarm screamed through the house. Oliver bolted upright, eyes wide, panic written across his small face. I grabbed him, covering his ears and whispering reassurances. "We're safe. We just need to be brave and quiet." Downstairs, the intruder cursed violently. Furniture scraped floors. Glass shattered. He was running through the house, desperate. I could hear him muttering about the stupid kid he didn't expect to find. The door shook violently under the pressure of his crowbar. I clutched the knife, positioning myself between him and Oliver. The wood around the lock splintered, shadows of the intruder flickering through the gap. I screamed, not words, just pure noise. He froze. I yelled that the police were coming. His muttering faltered, breathing heavy. Then sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer. He cursed and fled down the stairs, out the front door. In the porch light, I got a clear look at his face. Patchy beard, crooked nose, tattoo on his neck. Bird or dragon, I couldn't tell. He sprinted across the lawn and vanished as the first police car skidded around the corner, lights painting red and blue across the street. I stayed in the room with Oliver, holding the knife until officers announced themselves. Even then, I checked their badges through the crack before moving the chair and letting them in. Oliver clung to me, trembling, refusing to let go. Mrs. Brennan arrived minutes later, hysterical, alternating between hugging Oliver and thanking me. The police documented everything. Electronics were missing, but the safe remained untouched. The detective later said my description matched the intruder perfectly, down to the dragon tattoo. Mrs. Brennan offered extra money, but I couldn't take it. I was just glad Oliver was safe. The adrenaline didn't leave me for hours. Even after the police had escorted me and Oliver downstairs, made sure he was unharmed and taken my statement, my hands shook uncontrollably. Oliver refused to let go of me. Every time I tried to set him down, his small fingers clutched my shirt tighter, as if letting go meant the intruder might suddenly appear again. Mrs. Brennan paced the living room, frantic, muttering apologies and promising she would never leave him alone for this long again. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but my voice caught in my throat every time I looked at her panic-stricken face. The police walked through the house again, documenting every cabinet he'd opened, every piece of broken glass, and the paths he had taken. Nothing about him had felt sloppy. He'd known exactly where to look, and yet the alarm had been the one thing that saved us. After filing my report, I went outside with Oliver, letting him cling to my arm while the night air hit my face. The street was flooded with red and blue lights, reflecting off the identical houses, giving the neighborhood a surreal, almost alien glow. Neighbors had come outside to watch, murmuring anxiously among themselves, but no one had seen the man flee. The detective explained that he had been casing the neighborhood for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Apparently, Mrs. Brennan's ex-husband had bragged about money he kept in the old house, money that no longer existed, without realizing the wrong person had overheard. The man was a known burglar with a history of targeting empty houses, and now he had evidence he didn't expect, a child present. That night, I drove home with Oliver asleep against my shoulder in the back seat, still trembling in his sleep, murmuring something about the bad man. I couldn't shake the image of the crowbar tapping against his thigh, his raspy voice muttering, the way he moved through the house like he had every right to be there. It was a nightmare I had lived, yet somehow real. Over the next few days, I barely slept. Every creak in my apartment felt like the man had followed me home, even though I knew logically that was impossible. I double-checked every lock, every window, even the small gaps in the sliding door tracks. I researched home security systems, considered buying motion detectors for my own apartment, and rehearsed scenarios in my head. I felt exposed, violated, and oddly responsible. even though all I had done was show up for a normal babysitting job. The police eventually called to say they had apprehended the intruder 3 blocks away, hiding in someone's shed with a pillowcase full of stolen items. The gang tattoo on his neck confirmed his identity, and the stolen electronics from Mrs. Brennan's house matched what they found. He was charged with breaking and entering, attempted robbery, and child endangerment. He claimed he thought the house was empty, but the detective didn't buy it, and neither did I. There was no way he hadn't noticed Oliver upstairs. Mrs. Brennan tried to give me a bonus for my bravery, but I refused. Money didn't feel like the right way to measure what had happened. Instead, I wanted reassurance that Oliver was safe, that the house was secure, and that someone had learned a lesson about planning criminal acts with children involved. She later sent me a photo at Christmas. Oliver in his school play, grinning like nothing had ever happened, clutching the same triceratops, still innocent, still trusting. It made me smile despite the lingering unease. Even months later, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The smell of vanilla candles, the way the motion sensor lights flickered, the metallic scrape of the crowbar on the cabinet. I replayed every second in my head. The hiding, the alarm, the adrenaline, and how quickly ordinary life had shifted into terror. Babysitting had always seemed simple, straightforward. That night taught me that anyone could be in danger at any moment, even in the safest neighborhoods. I found myself obsessively checking locks before bed, counting windows, ensuring I knew exactly who had access to a space. I avoided babysitting strangers whenever possible, sticking to families I knew or had been recommended by friends. Every time I heard a bump or scrape in an unfamiliar apartment or house, my pulse spiked, and memories of the intruder returned in vivid detail. Therapy helped me process it, though the fear never completely vanished. The thought that someone could study your routine, anticipate your moves, and exploit every weakness left a mark on me. I realized that fear wasn't weakness, it was awareness. And that night, awareness had saved Oliver's life. Occasionally, I still drive past that neighborhood. It looks harmless now, peaceful even, but my memory fills in the cracks, the shadow by the sliding door, the crowbar tapping, the man moving through the rooms as if he belonged there. I remember thinking, how quickly does a normal night turn into a nightmare? One moment, you're building Lego towers. The next, you're calculating every second, every hiding place, every escape route, while a stranger is inside your building. Babysitting has become a job I approach with respect and caution. I carry a small emergency kit, a personal alarm, and I check every window, door, and lock before starting. I've even trained myself in basic self-defense, knowing that instincts alone can save you when terror is real. Oliver eventually returned to normal, but even he remembers the night in pieces. Sometimes, he'll ask me about the bad man in a quiet voice, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity instead of fear. I reassure him, always, that everything is okay now, and that there are adults who protect him. The Triceratops remains at his side, a small talisman against the memory of that night. Looking back, I know I made the right choices, trusting my instincts, acting quickly, and using the tools available to me. The smart home panic button, the hidden tablet, and even my own courage kept Oliver safe. The intruder was caught, justice served, but the lesson remains. Danger can hide behind perfection in a quiet neighborhood, under the guise of a routine evening. And sometimes, it only takes one brave decision to prevent a tragedy. I still babysit occasionally, but never for strangers without proper verification. I check every lock, at least twice, sometimes 3 times, and I keep my own panic plan ready. That night changed me, sharpened my instincts, and reminded me how quickly the ordinary can become terrifying. And while I hope never to face anything like that again, I know I'm ready if I do. Because bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act, even when every instinct screams that you're outmatched. That night, I was outmatched, but I acted, and Oliver slept safely. trusting that the world was still a place where someone was looking out for him. Every summer, until I turned 12, my family rented the same cabin near Pine Ridge Lake in northern Michigan. We'd been going there since I was barely old enough to walk, and by the time I was 12, I knew every trail, every fishing spot, and every creaky floorboard in that old cabin like the back of my hand. My parents loved it because it was cheap and isolated. The nearest neighbor was nearly a mile through thick woods, and the closest town was a half-hour drive down winding dirt roads. That isolation is what made it perfect for family bonding, my dad always said. No TV, no internet, just card games, fishing, and campfires. But that same isolation is what made what I saw that night possible. It was late August, and the heat was unbearable. The cabin had no air conditioning, just a couple of ancient ceiling fans that barely stirred the sticky, humid air. My younger sister Katie was snoring softly in the bunk below me, and my parents' room was at the far end of the hallway. I was lying awake in my Pokemon pajamas, sweating and tossing under the blanket, when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or a deer nosing around outside. But this wasn't a casual noise. It was rhythmic, heavy, deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. My heart skipped a beat. I tiptoed to the window that faced the wide field behind our cabin, the one that stretched at least 100 yards before the tree line swallowed everything. The moon was nearly full that night, washing the grass and trees in silver light. That's when I saw him, a man, dressed head to toe in dark clothes, dragging something bulky across the field. Whatever it was under the blue tarp was heavy, uneven, making him lean hard to one side with every step. He stopped occasionally to wipe sweat from his brow, scanning the surrounding darkness like he was making sure no one was watching. But even from that distance, I could see his face. Round, flushed, thick mustache, and deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. And then he did something that made my stomach twist. He smiled. Not a friendly, harmless smile, but a slow, calculated curl of lips, while his eyes stayed flat, cold, almost empty. He raised a hand and waved at me, just once, like he was greeting a neighbor over the fence. Then he bent down and continued dragging the tarp toward the tree line, never once looking back. I pressed my face against the screen, too frozen to move. My legs felt like jelly, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to wake my parents, but what could I even say? There's a man dragging something into the woods? My dad would probably think it was a poacher with a deer. That smile, that wave, it felt like a warning, like some twisted agreement had passed between us. He knew I'd seen him, and he didn't care. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, that maybe I had imagined it, but I knew better. I spent the rest of that night listening to every little sound. The ceiling fan's faint clicks, Katie's breathing, the hoot of an owl somewhere deep in the woods, expecting his return. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat breakfast properly, and refused to wander far from the cabin for the rest of the vacation. On the last day, as we were loading up the car, our neighbor, Mr. Holloway, came by with his beagle. He started talking to my dad about a break-in at the old Whitman property, about a back door kicked in, muddy boot prints everywhere. Probably kids, he said casually. But I knew the truth. I knew exactly whose boots had left prints in the grass that night, moving like they had all the time in the world, confident that no one would stop him. We never went back to Pine Ridge Lake after that summer. My dad got promoted, and we started taking fancier vacations. Life went on, or at least I tried to make it go on. But that night stayed with me, tucked in the back of my mind, a shadow that grew bigger with every passing year. It wasn't until years later, during a mundane lunch break at my marketing job in Chicago, that I stumbled across the news article that shattered any lingering doubt. A serial killer named Donald Brewster had died in prison. Northern Michigan, mechanic, handyman, convicted of killing 3 women, suspected in at least 8 more. And there he was, the mugshot. Round face, thick mustache, deep-set eyes. The same eyes I had seen in the moonlight, staring at me across the field. I sank into my chair, coffee forgotten, as the article mapped out his crimes. Red dots scattered across the woods behind Pine Ridge Lake, the same woods where I'd seen him dragging that blue tarp all those years ago. A woman named Teresa Vaughn had disappeared near our cabin. Her body was found wrapped in a blue tarp, buried not far from where I had watched him move in the moonlight. She had been trying to rebuild her life, had kids, a job interview scheduled the day she vanished. And there I was, a 12-year-old kid who had witnessed it all and said nothing. The article mentioned witnesses, at least 4 people, including children, who had seen Brewster lurking at night, walking through private property. Each time he had smiled, waved, and continued his business as if daring anyone to stop him. That wave, that smile, it wasn't friendly. It was control, a message that he saw us, and it meant nothing. By the time I finished reading, I felt sick, numb, and unbearably guilty. The pieces of that night snapped into place with a terrifying clarity. He had known exactly which cabins were empty, exactly when renters would arrive and leave, exactly when to strike, and I had been there, watching, unable to do anything. I didn't sleep that night. I called in sick the next day and drove up to Pine Ridge Lake, desperate for closure. The area had changed. New houses had replaced empty lots. Our old cabin was gone, replaced by a modern lake house. But the woods were the same. I found remnants of police tape, half rotted and tangled in branches, the site where the blue tarp had disappeared years before. I imagined Teresa Vaughn and the others, wondering if my eyes had seen the last moments of some of their lives. And I realized that the guilt wouldn't leave me, not ever. That night I stayed in the forest until the sun came up, listening to the birds and the rustle of the wind through the trees, but hearing in my mind the scrape, pause, scrape, pause, of a man dragging a body across the grass, and that flat, chilling smile as he waved at a terrified 12-year-old boy who couldn't stop him. I couldn't stop thinking about that summer at Pine Ridge Lake, even after all these years. The memory had settled like a shadow in my mind, creeping in at unexpected moments. The way the wind rustled through trees, the way a shadow stretched across the lawn at night, or even the faintest scrape of a branch outside my window. I kept telling myself it was just a memory, that it had been decades ago, but seeing Brewster's face in that mugshot had shaken something loose inside me, something I couldn't ignore. A few weeks later, I took a weekend off and drove north. My wife Jessica had gently suggested I go. Face it, deal with it. Maybe it'll help, she said. I didn't tell her exactly why. I just needed to see the place for myself, to confront the forest that had held that terrible secret for so long. The road to Pine Ridge had changed. New houses had crept into the lots where empty cabins once stood, and the winding dirt paths now had gravel patches patched into them. But the woods, the thick, looming trees, still looked the same. Dark, imposing, silent. I parked at the public boat launch and walked the old path toward the area where Brewster had been seen dragging that tarp. The memory hit me immediately. The moonlight, the lumpy shape, the slow, deliberate wave he had given me. My pulse quickened, and I had to stop myself from bolting back to the car. Part of me wanted to convince myself it had been a childhood imagination, but the evidence in the news article told a different story. This wasn't imagination. This had happened. The forest was eerily quiet. I could hear the soft snap of twigs under my boots, the occasional bird flutter, and the distant hum of the lake against the shore. I reached a clearing where the old utility shed had once stood. Now it was half collapsed, swallowed by vines and weeds. I crouched behind a tree and tried to picture Brewster there, hauling a tarp, wiping sweat from his forehead, scanning the darkness for witnesses. The thought made my stomach turn. I had been there. I had seen him, and he had known I was watching. That wave, That smile, it had been a challenge. I ran my hands over the rotting wood of the shed, imagining the horror it had concealed. Whoever had been inside that tarp, whoever had died by Brewster's hand, had passed through this clearing silently, methodically. My mind went back to Teresa Vaughan, her dreams, her family. She had trusted the world, trusted people, and that trust had been shattered. I felt a knot in my chest thinking about it. After a long pause, I continued walking along the old trail, following what I thought had been his route into the deeper woods. The ground was uneven, thick with leaves and moss. I found patches of disturbed earth that might have been his shortcuts or hiding spots for evidence. The forest held an oppressive silence, as if the trees themselves were keeping the secret. I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone moving between the trees, though I knew it was impossible. Brewster was dead, yet a primal fear lingered, unshakable. By late afternoon, I had reached the far side of the property where some of the bodies had been discovered. Red markers and faded remnants of police tape still clung to saplings and shrubs. I knelt and traced my fingers through the dirt, imagining what had happened there, imagining the lives cut short. The magnitude of it pressed down on me. I realized then that I had been carrying this guilt for decades, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had seen, I had known, and I had been powerless. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I wandered back toward the lake. The water shimmered with the colors of dusk, innocent and beautiful, yet tainted in my mind by memory. I thought about my younger self, the 12-year-old boy in pajamas, sweating and terrified, watching a killer at work. How naive I had been, how powerless. But I also thought about how close I had been, how I had seen and remembered. That knowledge, terrible as it was also proof that I had survived, that I could bear witness. That night, I camped near the lake, unable to stay in a hotel. I set up a small tent and a campfire, just like I had with my family all those years ago. As the flames danced, I replayed the scene in my mind, over and over. The blue tarp, the dragging, the wave. I realized something. Brewster's power wasn't just in his crimes. It was in the fear he instilled, the way he toyed with his victims and observers alike. He had smiled at me, not because he knew me, but because he knew fear itself. That recognition, that acknowledgement of my terror, had stayed with me for years. I thought about the people he had killed, the families left behind, and the randomness of survival. Why had I been spared? Why had I only seen him at work, instead of becoming a victim myself? I didn't have answers, only the gnawing sense that life was fragile, and sometimes the world hid its darkness in plain sight. When I finally drove back to Chicago, the guilt was still there, but so was a strange sense of closure. I had faced the place, seen the shed, walked the forest. The past hadn't changed, but my understanding of it had. I called Teresa Vaughan's sister through Facebook, not to share my memory, but just to say I was sorry for her loss. She thanked me warmly, mentioning Teresa's love of the outdoors, her spirit, her dreams. I realized that even in death, people could be remembered for what they loved, not just for how they were taken. I've returned to Pine Ridge Lake a few times since then, always lingering on the edge of the woods, always careful to remember the boundaries of what's real and what's memory. I keep telling myself that the dragging sound I sometimes hear in my sleep is just a fan, just a branch scraping against a window. But sometimes, late at night, I still see that smile, that wave, and I have to remind myself that it's only memory, a shadow of a man who wielded fear like a weapon. The past doesn't change, and some things can't be undone. But surviving, remembering, acknowledging the terror without letting it consume me, that's how I live with it. I can never forget Donald Brewster, the man behind the smile. I can't forget that summer, that night, that blue tarp. But I can honor the memory of those he took by living, by telling this story, by never letting silence protect him again. Phoenix in July is brutal. Even past midnight, the heat clings to your skin, suffocating and relentless. That night, it felt like the sun had melted into the asphalt and never left. I had just finished another soul-sucking week at the call center, the kind of job that slowly drains every ounce of life out of you. Weekends were sacred. My buddy Jake's birthday party was supposed to be the perfect escape. The party had started strong, a swarm of friends in his backyard, music blasting, beers flowing. But around midnight the cops rolled up. Just like that, the vibe died. People scattered, cars peeling out, leaving a few of us standing in Jake's driveway, sweating through our shirts, trying to salvage the night with the last warm beers from the cooler. It was Tommy who first mentioned the Desert Palm Motel. It's cash only, no questions asked. Nobody cares how loud you get, he said. A place like that sounded perfect to 6 reckless college grads who had just survived a night of police intervention. By the time we arrived, the Desert Palm looked like a relic. The neon sign flickered and blinked, missing half its letters. The long row of doors faced the cracked parking lot like watchful eyes. An old man with a glass eye counted our cash twice at the front desk before sliding us a key. Room 12. The room was a dump. Orange shag carpet that crunched beneath your feet, peeling wood paneling, a bathroom mirror with a diagonal crack running across it. But for $30 and no questions asked, it was perfect. Jake unloaded a cooler of beer from his trunk. Megan brought leftover birthday cake. Carlos had a bottle of Jack Daniels he'd been hoarding. Ashley lugged a portable speaker so loud I swore it could wake the dead. Tommy and I stopped at a gas station for chips and energy drinks, fully expecting to party until sunrise. By around 2 a.m., we were all wasted. Jake was on the bed doing terrible impressions of our high school teachers while Megan filmed him, laughing so hard she had to restart the video 3 times. Carlos and Ashley claimed the corner by the broken air conditioner, whispering conspiratorially. Tommy was mixing drinks in tiny coffee cups, naming them after celebrities. One called the Brad Pitt, basically whiskey with warm Red Bull. We were idiots, plain and simple, loud, obnoxious, the kind of guests every motel manager hates. Then Jake got the idea that would turn our night from chaos into pure terror. He stood by the door, swaying slightly, a grin of mischief plastered across his face. "Yo, watch this," he said. Before anyone could stop him, he flung our door open and pounded on the next room with both fists, shouting in a fake deep voice, "Police! Open up! We know you're in there!" He slammed our door and collapsed on the floor, laughing hysterically. We joined in, a brief moment of pure stupidity, until we heard their door open. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but fast, hard, like it had been kicked. Through the thin walls, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, then 3 sharp knocks on our door, slow, measured, menacing. The music was still blasting, but none of us moved or spoke. Jake's face drained of color. Megan grabbed his arm. Tommy cut the speaker. In the sudden silence, we heard it. Ragged, labored breathing. Not normal. The kind of breathing that promised trouble. A voice followed, low, grating, with an accent I couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe Russian. "I know you're listening," it said. "The funny boy who likes to play police. Open the door. We need to talk about respect." We froze, statues trapped in terror. The doorknob rattled, not in anger, but in warning. And then, metal sliding against metal, the click of a lock. Tommy peeked through the peephole, then yanked back, pale as a ghost. "Big dude," he whispered. "Tattoos all over his neck. He's just staring at the door." The man spoke again, louder. "I'm staying here with my brother. He's sick, very sick. Your noise woke him. He hasn't slept in days. You think this is funny?" His voice cracked on the last word. Jake stammered, trying an apology. "Hey man, I'm sorry. Really sorry. Just a stupid joke. We didn't know about your brother. It only made things worse." The door shook violently. Fist, shoulder, we didn't know. "Stupid joke," he repeated, louder, unstable. Then silence, followed by sounds from the next room. Another door opening. Two voices speaking fast, harsh, a wet, awful cough echoing through the walls. Then the voice again, chillingly calm. "My brother wants to meet the funny boys. Maybe you can make him laugh since you woke him." The doorknob rattled again, old and flimsy. Carlos and Tommy threw themselves against it. Jake fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. One bar, sometimes none. Megan cried. Ashley tried the window. Jammed. The man outside paused. Calm. Worse than before. Then the sound. Scraping. Metal on wood. Slow. Deliberate. A message carved into our door. We huddled together, terrified. Every creak, cough, and whisper from the next room tightened the knot in my chest. The scratching had stopped, but the terror didn't. Every shadow in that tiny motel room seemed alive. Every creak of the floorboards from the hall outside made my stomach knot tighter. We didn't speak, not a word. All of us huddled together, hearts pounding like war drums. Every few minutes, a single heavy knock would echo through the wall, a reminder that they were still there, still watching. Jake kept pacing, fumbling with his phone, trying desperately to get a signal. One bar appeared for a second, then vanished before he could dial. I don't think any of us had realized before that moment how truly helpless we were. We were trapped, cut off, and completely at the mercy of these two men. Hours passed, or at least it felt that way. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the desert heat made it feel like we were roasting in slow motion. Then came movement outside our window. Tommy, who had been frozen near the curtains, peeked and froze again. The big man was in the parking lot, walking slowly toward a beaten-up Ford truck. He reached into the bed and pulled out something long, heavy, like a crowbar or a tire iron. And then he just stood there, staring at our room, tapping it against his leg. Ashley lost it completely, hyperventilating, shaking, screaming that we needed to run. "Now! Go! Move!" But it was impossible. Our cars were parked right next to his truck. There was no way out. We were trapped. Carlos whispered, barely audible, "Maybe we can call the motel office." But the phone in the room was dead. Dead silence. Whoever had lived in that room before us had maybe cut the line, or maybe the phone had never worked. Either way, it didn't matter. We were alone. The big man lingered for another 10 minutes, occasionally stepping closer to our door, then back to his truck. Then finally, he walked inside. The silence was deafening, and then, through the thin wall, we heard him speak, calmly, deliberately. "1 more hour," he said. "Then we visit." It was a countdown, a slow, excruciating countdown. Jake was apologizing over and over, begging, promising money, promising anything. Tommy was hammering on the bathroom window with the flimsy shower rod. Carlos held a broken beer bottle like a weapon, but we all knew it was useless. And then, nothing. The hour passed, stretching time into an unbearable eternity. Nothing happened. The motel was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Finally, Tommy got the courage to peek through the curtains. Room 13, empty, their door wide open. The Ford truck gone. We didn't hesitate. We grabbed our stuff and ran for the cars like our lives depended on it, because they did. None of us even thought to check out. I just needed to get as far away as possible. Before we left, I had to see what they'd carved into the door. A single word. Quiet. Deep, deliberate letters scratched into the wood. Not a threat. Not a curse. Just a command. On the drive back to Phoenix, nobody said a word. The air-conditioned car felt like a sanctuary after the nightmare. Jake paid for the door damage a week later when the motel called. The manager explained something that chilled me even more. The men in room 13 had been there for weeks. The sick brother had terminal bone cancer. They were driving across the country to get him to some special treatment center in California. We were terrified for nothing, or maybe terrified for everything, because a simple prank could have ended with one of us broken, bleeding, or worse. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I Googled the Desert Palm Motel. What I found made my stomach twist. A news article from September. 2 men had been arrested at a gas station in New Mexico for nearly killing a college kid with a tire iron. The kid had been playing loud music at the pump. The article included a photo. Same scarred face. Same neck tattoos. The sick brother had died just days before the assault. Sometimes I replay that night in my head. The sweat, the fear, the sound of that slow, deliberate scratching. How close we came to being that kid at the gas station. One stupid prank, one stupid joke. It could have ended us. I still can't stay in motels. And every time I hear someone banging on a door, even in a joke, my body tenses up. That night taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Some lessons you survive by luck. Some you learn the hard way. And some you never survive at all. I never expected Pete sitting to be terrifying. Sure, I'd seen plenty of listings for sprawling estates and isolated homes, but $700 for a week watching 2 golden retrievers on a Vermont property seemed too good to pass up. The Andersons' house was a mansion tucked minutes outside Burlington, surrounded by nothing but trees, gravel roads, and the occasional deer crossing. Their instructions were meticulous: alarm codes, emergency contacts, feeding schedules for Buddy and Rosie, even how to operate a coffee machine that could practically double as a spaceship console. The last note mentioned their only neighbor, Harold Fitzgerald, mild dementia, friendly but confused. The first 2 days were blissful. I lounged on the couch with Buddy sprawled across my lap, Rosie chasing tennis balls in the yard until her paws thumped the gravel in exhaustion. The house was absurdly quiet, aside from their barking, my typing, and the occasional hum of the heater. Everything screamed luxury and calm. But Thursday afternoon, that calm shattered. I noticed him first from the kitchen window, a frail-looking man at the edge of the property, binoculars pressed to his face, his white hair stuck up in patches, and for a moment I thought, oh, it's just Harold Fitzgerald, probably confused. I waved, expecting a sheepish nod. Nothing. He stayed there, staring at the house, scanning as if memorizing every inch. By evening, the tension ratcheted. Buddy growled, deep and warning, and Rosie barked ferociously. I followed their gaze. Harold, or whoever he was, had moved closer, crouched behind the Andersons' SUV. At first, I thought it was a walking stick he held, but the way he carried it made my chest tighten. That's when I realized a rifle, a hunting rifle, aimed vaguely toward the house. Panic hit me like ice water. I grabbed the fridge notes frantically, searching for Nancy, his daughter, the only contact listed for emergencies. Her number went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Meanwhile, he was inching toward the front porch, rifle held like he knew exactly what he was doing. I had 2 dogs, a massive house, and no backup. Every instinct screamed to hide. But where? The estate was open, the windows enormous. He reached the door, jiggling the knob, tapping rhythmically on the glass. Buddy and Rosie went wild, barking like their lives depended on it. I whispered into the phone, trying to keep calm. Please, he's outside. He has a rifle. He thinks I'm a burglar. The dispatcher's voice sharpened immediately. Minutes, she said. Units were on the way. Minutes felt like hours. The rifle clicked. That sound, the mechanical chamber click, is one you never forget. My stomach dropped. I thought of the bedroom, the dogs pressed against me, the lock holding only by a thin strip of metal. He was methodical, pacing the halls, checking doors, talking to himself in that unsteady, raspy voice. I know you're in here. I saw you yesterday. I tried reasoning. Mr. Fitzgerald, the Andersons hired me. I'm pet-sitting. Please put the gun down. His voice cracked into anger, confusion, and accusation all at once. You probably killed Nancy too, he spat. Police will find her body. I held my breath. The hallway seemed endless. The steps upstairs were faint but deliberate. Buddy whimpered low. Rosie's growl was steady, sharp. I whispered into the phone, telling the dispatcher I was trapped in the master bedroom. My eyes scanned for anything. Lamp, bookend, chair, but nothing could stop a rifle. Then Rosie howled. Long, mournful, almost operatic. Buddy joined her. The sound echoed, filling the halls, and for the first time, the rifle holder froze. I heard him mutter, confused. "Those are the Andersons' dogs?" His certainty wavered. The howl continued, eerie and strange, yet somehow comforting. He stepped back from the door. Minutes later, sirens, glorious, piercing sirens. He muttered one last time, tired, defeated. "Police can sort this mess out," and retreated. I held the dogs, shaking, until the officers arrived, disarmed him, and reassured me everything was fine. Nancy arrived, panicked and apologetic. It turned out her father's dementia had worsened. He'd been convinced the neighborhood was under siege. Even after the officers left, even after Mr. Fitzgerald was taken into care, I couldn't stop trembling. That night, I realized how fragile the line between neighborly vigilance and danger really was. One person's perception of threat can create terror for another in seconds. The Andersons cut their trip short, paying me triple and offering therapy support, but the image of that frail man with the rifle, so certain, stayed burned in my mind. The days after the incident blurred together. Even with Mr. Fitzgerald placed in a memory care facility and the Andersons safely back home, I couldn't shake the adrenaline. Every creak in my apartment in Burlington made my heart leap. Every stranger passing on the sidewalk triggered a flash of paranoia. I kept replaying the scene, the mechanical click of the rifle chamber, the way his eyes had been so wild, yet oddly focused, as if he were entirely convinced I had been casing the house. It didn't matter that I was innocent. The conviction in his mind had made him a threat to my life. I went back to work, but nothing felt normal. Even when sitting in a coffee shop, I couldn't focus. The sound of metal scraping, doors closing, footsteps on wood. It all made me tense. I found myself checking locks repeatedly, walking around my apartment to ensure every window was secured. My friends noticed the change. "You're jumpy," one said. "You need a vacation." I laughed it off, but inside I knew it wasn't just normal stress. It was lingering fear, the kind that embeds itself in your bones and refuses to let go. I began thinking about how fragile trust can be. One frail, confused man had nearly shattered my life, simply because his mind had created an entirely different reality. To him, I wasn't a young professional pet-sitting dogs. I was a thief, a criminal casing a house, and in his eyes, I deserved confrontation, even with a gun. That perspective, entirely his own, had turned a simple week-long job into a nightmare. Sometimes at night, I would dream. In my dreams, I was back at the Andersons' estate. The house stretched impossibly, hallways lengthening, doors leading to dark corridors that had never existed. Harold, or Mr. Fitzgerald, was always there, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, rifle in hand, muttering accusations. Buddy and Rosie were there too, barking, howling, but I could never quite reach them in time. Every dream ended the same, with the click of the rifle and that moment of total helplessness. Even months later, I would find myself waking in cold sweats, convinced I heard that same click downstairs or outside my apartment door. I had nightmares about isolated houses, strangers hiding behind trees, and being trapped with no one to help. I realized the trauma wasn't just from the immediate threat. It was the uncertainty, the knowledge that a mind can twist reality into danger at any moment. I started carrying a small pepper spray with me everywhere, even on short walks. I checked neighborhoods I visited for signs of isolation, for anything that might hint at lurking danger. My sense of vigilance became almost obsessive. Friends joked that I was hyper-aware, but I couldn't help it. That week at the Andersons' house had shown me that danger could come from where you least expect it, even from someone appearing harmless. Therapy helped, slowly. talking through the incident, breaking down every detail, naming my fear. It helped me regain some control. My therapist called it trauma from an acute threat, but I knew it was more than that. It wasn't just fear for my life that haunted me. It was the realization that the world could be interpreted in such radically different ways by different minds, that a single misperception could escalate into life or death danger, with the truth irrelevant in the moment. I thought about Mr. Fitzgerald often. Despite everything, I couldn't hate him. His actions had been terrifying, yes, but they weren't truly malicious. They were a product of a mind convinced of a threat that wasn't there. Yet the danger had been real enough for me. That duality gnawed at me. Understanding the person didn't make the experience any less traumatizing. I stayed in touch with the Andersons, checking in occasionally. Buddy and Rosie were calm now, as if the tension had never existed, but I could never completely forget how different they had been that night. Their growls and howls, a primal warning system I hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The estate, once a symbol of luxury and calm, became a haunting reminder of vulnerability. Months turned into a year, and I eventually pet-sat again, but never in a secluded house. I stayed in townhouses or apartments, busy streets, neighbors nearby. I learned to trust some instincts, but the memory lingered. I could still see him, frail, gray-haired, rifle in hand, his confusion mingled with deadly certainty. The thought that he had documented every car, every movement, every visitor in that neighborhood notebook was chilling. He had lived in a world of his own making, and I had crossed paths with it. Even now, when I drive past rural areas or isolated estates, I feel the pulse of that fear, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter, eyes scanning for shadows. The line between safety and threat had been drawn for me, and I knew it could shift in an instant. One mind, one misperception, one click of a rifle, enough to change everything. The lesson was clear, even if uncomfortable. Reality isn't always shared. One person's heroism can be another's horror. The elderly neighbor, convinced he was protecting his community, nearly became the source of my death. I had survived, yes, but the experience left a permanent mark. Fear, I realized, isn't always about the tangible threat. It's about the uncertainty, the knowledge that in certain moments, logic and reason hold no power. Sometimes I still dream of that November afternoon. I hear the click of the rifle, the shouts, the dogs barking in harmony. And when I wake, I remind myself of a simple truth. Awareness saves lives, caution prevents tragedy, and even the most ordinary-seeming people can become extraordinary threats under the wrong circumstances. But the most terrifying part isn't the rifle or the shouting. It's the certainty in a mind that believes it is right. That clarity of conviction is unstoppable, and the thought that anyone could live fully convinced of a false reality, armed and dangerous, makes every quiet moment in an isolated place a potential nightmare. I learned to respect boundaries, to trust verification over assumption, and to listen to instincts honed by fear. And while I may never fully shake the terror of that week, it shaped me, made me cautious, aware, alive. The Andersons' house, Mr. Fitzgerald, Buddy and Rosie, they're forever etched in my mind, a reminder of how thin the line is between safety and danger, between perception and reality. I remember that night far more vividly than I want to. It's like the memory carved itself into my brain, refusing to fade. I was 16, restless, broke, and hanging out with Ryan, my best friend since middle school. We weren't troublemakers, at least not usually, but boredom has a way of twisting into recklessness. That night it twisted into something I'll never forget. The streets were empty, the kind of quiet that made every creak, every distant hum of a streetlight feel amplified. Ryan had this glint in his eye, half mischief, half dare, when he brought up the idea. Swipe something small from the corner store on Maple Street. I laughed nervously at first, thinking it was just one of his stupid jokes. But there was a dare in the air, unspoken but heavy. The store itself was tiny, sandwiched between a laundromat and a barber shop that always smelled faintly of hair dye and cigarettes. Its windows were plastered with faded posters. Soft drinks, scratch-off tickets, and the occasional outdated promotion. Kids like us didn't usually go there. It was for tired adults picking up milk, cigarettes, or a six-pack after work. But to us, slipping in and taking something without paying was the ultimate test of courage. I followed Ryan up to the glass door, the neon "open" sign buzzing faintly above us. He nudged my shoulder, whispering, "Come on, just something small. Gum, a soda. Nobody cares." My stomach twisted. My heart was pounding like a drumbeat in a horror movie. My nerves were screaming, but I didn't want to back down. Not in front of Ryan. Not tonight. The instant we stepped inside, the smell hit me. Dust, mixed with a sharp tang of cleaning supplies. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. The aisles felt narrower than I remembered, like the shelves were closing in. And then I noticed him. Mr. Harris. I'd seen him plenty of times before. Heavy-set, gray stubble, eyes deep-set under a permanent frown. But tonight, something about him made the air feel heavier, tighter. He leaned on the counter, his gaze snapping to us the instant we stepped inside. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition, like he'd been waiting for kids like us to test him. Ryan drifted toward the snack aisle, acting casual, fingers brushing candy bars and chips. I hung back near the coolers, pretending to read labels, palms clammy, every second stretching impossibly long. My fingers found a pack of gum, and I slipped it into my hoodie sleeve. The wrapper crinkled. Too loud. I froze. Mr. Harris's eyes didn't move from us, sharp and calculating. It felt like he could see into my chest, into my soul, into every thought I was trying desperately to bury. Ryan grabbed a soda, slipping it under his jacket with the ease of someone who had done this before. He shot me a quick glance that said, "See? Easy." And that's when it all went wrong. "Hey!" The bark of his voice slammed into me like a punch. Not angry, not annoyed, terrified, raw, primal. I turned slowly. Mr. Harris wasn't behind the counter anymore. He had stepped out, and in his hand was a baseball bat. Not new, splintered at the handle, knuckles white around the grip. His eyes darted between us like we were cornered animals. "Put it back," he said, and it wasn't calm. It was the sound of someone pushed past the edge, someone who had already been hurt too many times, someone who wouldn't hesitate. I froze, gum still in my sleeve, heart hammering. Ryan laughed nervously. "Relax, man. It's just a soda." That only made it worse. Mr. Harris's face darkened. He stepped closer, raising the bat. The floor beneath our sneakers felt like it had disappeared. Suddenly I understood. We weren't kids playing a silly game. We were a threat, and he had been ready. Ryan started to move, probably for the door, but Mr. Harris swung the bat, not at him, but to block the exit. Wood slammed the linoleum with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. My throat went dry. "We'll put it back, okay? Just calm down." My voice cracked, betraying my fear. Ryan dropped the soda. The can rolled across the floor, clinking against a shelf. But Mr. Harris didn't lower the bat. His breathing was ragged, loud, and the raw intensity in his eyes made me feel like a trapped animal. "You think this is a game?" he spat. "Last week someone pulled a knife on me in here. You think I'm going to wait around for it to happen again?" And in that moment, I got it. The anger wasn't just about theft. It was fear. The constant threat of violence had etched itself into him, and we were the next trigger. I raised my hand slowly, placing the gum back on the nearest shelf. "We're done. We're leaving," I said, trying to sound steady, though my chest felt like it was caving in. Ryan muttered something that sounded like an apology. His grin, once cocky, was gone. We edged toward the door. Every step felt like walking across a tightrope over a pit of spikes. Mr. Harris followed, bat still in hand. It wasn't until we were outside, the cold night air biting at our skin, that he finally let us go. Neither of us spoke as we walked briskly away. The adrenaline left me shaking. Ryan finally broke the silence, voice small, almost a whisper. We could have died in there, and he was right. We didn't speak as we walked away from the store, but every step felt heavier than the last. My hoodie still smelled faintly of gum, a small, stupid reminder of how close we had come to something far worse than a lecture. Ryan kept glancing over his shoulder, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. What if Mr. Harris had actually swung that bat? Back at my house, I locked the door behind me and slumped against it, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking, and my stomach had turned over so many times I felt like I might be sick. I replayed the store in my head, every second stretching longer with each repetition. The buzz of the fluorescent lights, the slam of the bat, the wild intensity in his eyes. That look, I realized, wasn't just anger. It was a warning. The next day, we avoided Maple Street like it was a war zone. Even the thought of passing that corner store made my stomach tighten. But as weeks passed, the memory didn't fade. It grew. I started noticing things about the neighborhood that I'd never paid attention to. The way people whispered when they walked by the store. How neighbors' eyes lingered on it like they were waiting for someone to cross a line. Rumors began to circulate. A couple of kids had reportedly gotten into trouble there last month. Nothing serious, just enough to make the adults in the neighborhood wary. But we knew the truth. We'd been that close to a disaster. Then, one Friday night, Ryan called me. His voice was almost trembling, even over the phone. "You remember Mr. Harris?" he asked. I swallowed hard, feeling a cold sweat prickling the back of my neck. "Yeah, what about him?" He hesitated, then said, "Someone's breaking into the store." I felt my stomach drop. "What? Are you joking?" "I'm not. They say he was inside, and there's cops everywhere. Windows broken. Something's off." I couldn't move. I sat there in the dark of my room, replaying the night we had snuck in. The adrenaline, the fear, it all came rushing back, sharper this time, with a sickening sense of dread. I grabbed my jacket and headed over, against my better judgment. The store was chaos. Police tape cordoned off the entrance. Flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. People whispered on the sidewalk, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and burnt wood. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail, I later found out. The fire had been small, but it had spread fast, and Mr. Harris had barely made it out. He was shaking, pale as a sheet, but alive. The police wouldn't let anyone near him. Seeing him like that, the man who had terrified us weeks ago, made my stomach twist. And then I realized something worse. It wasn't the fire. Not really. It was the idea that people were angry enough to hurt him. And what would that mean for us? The kids who'd pushed him over the edge, even if only in our minds. I started to notice little things after that. Footsteps outside my window at night. Shadows flickering across my room, even when I was sure the street was empty. Phone calls from unknown numbers with silence on the other end. Ryan insisted I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew the store had changed him, and maybe us too. We had poked the bear, and now the bear had claws we couldn't see. Months passed. We never returned to the store. We graduated from reckless teenage dares to cautious adults. But that night haunted me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time I heard a loud crash, every time someone banged a door, I flinched. Every time I saw a man with a bat, even in a baseball game, my heart raced like it was trying to escape my chest. And then, one night, years later, I saw him again. Mr. Harris, older now, still behind the counter, still watching the store with that same intensity. I passed by quickly, keeping my gaze straight ahead, pretending not to notice. But he did. I could feel it. The moment our eyes met, I knew the memory of that night had never left him either. The look wasn't just fear anymore. It was something colder, sharper, resentment, vigilance, and maybe a warning that some things you poke at in life don't forget, and they never forgive. Even now, I can't walk past that store without feeling my chest tighten. The memory of the bat, the fluorescent lights, the suffocating buzz of the neon sign, it's all there, like a ghost following me. Ryan moved away shortly after we graduated, but I can still hear his voice when I close my eyes, whispering, "We could have died in there." And we almost did. Some nights, I think about how easy it would have been to make one wrong move, one step too far, and it would have ended differently. That night changed the way I see dares, risks, and fear itself. I've learned that courage isn't about proving you can do something stupid without getting caught. Courage is knowing when to walk away, knowing when to stop, knowing that some games aren't worth playing. I was desperate when I got the text from Marcus. Rent was overdue, the electric bill stared at me like a warning every morning, and my diner job barely covered groceries. Most nights, I went to bed wondering how long I could keep the lights on. Then Marcus appeared online, casual, almost friendly, asking if I wanted to make some easy money. No questions, no interviews, just deliver packages around town. At first I laughed. It sounded absurd, but desperation makes you ignore your instincts. He promised I could make more in one day than I did all week serving tables, and when he said I could start the next morning, my judgment blurred, replaced by the lure of cash. I didn't even ask too many questions. Marcus's tone was calm, persuasive, and oddly convincing. The first pickup was at a strip mall parking lot. Marcus wasn't there, but a skinny guy with thinning blonde hair leaned casually against a beat-up sedan. "Tommy's cousin," he mumbled, barely looking at me. He dropped 2 medium boxes into my trunk and told me to leave. No paperwork, no instructions, except a scrawled address on an index card. The whole exchange lasted less than 5 minutes. I told myself not to overthink it. What could be in the boxes? Electronics? Clothes? I didn't care. I was just the driver. Still, as I drove through the quiet suburbs, I kept glancing at the boxes in my rearview mirror. Ordinary lawns, kids' bikes abandoned on sidewalks, dogs barking behind fences. It all seemed normal, but my chest kept tightening. The first few deliveries were easy, quick drop-offs. People barely looked at me. Doors slammed behind them. Yet the envelopes full of cash left under my windshield wiper made it feel like I had found a loophole in life itself. I began to relax, until the 4th delivery. That day, Marcus texted me late in the afternoon, pick up 1 box from the strip mall, but the familiar blonde guy wasn't there. Instead, a tall man in a leather jacket, baseball cap low over his eyes, silently loaded the trunk. The box was heavier this time, and his presence, unmoving, almost predatory, made my skin crawl. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He just nodded toward the street and walked away. The address led to a quiet duplex. Sunlight fell lazily across cracked sidewalks, but the drawn curtains made the house look abandoned. I parked a short distance away, heart hammering, debating whether to knock or leave the box on the porch. My hands shook as I carried it up the steps, each crack in the concrete echoing under my feet. Before I could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. A man slumped in a chair, his shirt soaked in dark red, stared at me. The metallic stench hit my nose. My stomach dropped. Blood pooled into the carpet beneath him. I froze. Another man appeared from the kitchen, hands smeared red, his eyes locked on mine. My pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed at me to drop the box and run, but I didn't. I lowered it carefully onto the floor, every second feeling like an eternity. He crouched, picked it up, and gestured sharply toward the door. My legs moved before I could process, stumbling back to my car, trembling, trying not to make a sound. 2 police cruisers were turning onto the street as I slid into the driver's seat. Panic gripped me. If I stayed, I'd be linked to the scene. If I left, they might pursue me. I drove, weaving through side streets, trying to disappear into the city's labyrinth. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Marcus, panic in text form. "Where are you? Don't talk to anyone. Drop the car now. My chest tightened. He knew too much. I realized I wasn't just a driver. I was now a liability. I tossed the phone into a trash bin, shut the door, and drove straight to my sister's apartment across town, hoping I could vanish, hoping they hadn't traced me yet. The next morning, the news confirmed my fears. The duplex was the site of a violent drug deal gone wrong. Multiple suspects, multiple deaths, no mention of a delivery person, no explanation for the strange woman who had left the box. But I knew. I knew exactly what I had seen, and I knew my face could be recognized if anyone connected the dots. I quit the diner that week. I changed my number. I moved 2 towns over. And even now, years later, my hands tighten whenever I see a package left on a porch or someone online asking if I want easy cash. I had narrowly escaped a nightmare, but some nights, I still wake up thinking about the blood, the heavy box, and the quiet, deadly eyes behind that baseball cap. I tried to convince myself it was over. I dropped the phone, left the city, changed my number, and stayed in the shadows. But the fear didn't go away. Even mundane things, the sight of a brown box at a neighbor's porch, the sound of a car pulling into a driveway, set my nerves on edge. It was like the adrenaline of that night had burrowed into my bones, refusing to leave. A week later, I made the mistake of checking my email. There it was, a single subject line. "We're watching." My stomach sank. No sender, no message inside, just the subject line, like a cold finger pressed against my spine. Panic rose, and I deleted it immediately, but the unease never left. I knew Marcus, or whoever he really was, had ways of finding me. I'd seen it firsthand. That night, those eyes watching me, the way the box was handled with deadly precision. It wasn't a normal delivery network. It was something else, something dangerous. I decided I had to know more. I had to understand what I'd gotten myself into. I started tracing Marcus online, piecing together what little digital trail he'd left. Every alias he used, every forum he popped up on, seemed harmless at first glance. Small-time courier ads, casual delivery gigs. But patterns emerged. Posts about urgent deliveries in cities I recognized. Mentions of people disappearing after picking up packages. I found a thread from someone who had vanished months earlier, and the last line of their post was chilling. They don't care who sees, who follows. They only care that it moves. That's when I realized the boxes weren't ordinary. They were tools, part of a system I didn't understand, a network of threats, fear, and violence. And I had been an unwitting participant. My hands shook just thinking about it. Then came the first direct encounter. I was at a grocery store, trying to act normal while checking my reflection in the tinted windows, when a car slowed beside mine in the parking lot. Leather jacket, baseball cap. He didn't get out, didn't speak. He just stared. My heart hammered. I floored it, weaving through traffic until I was certain I had lost him. The message was clear. Leave the deliveries behind. You're expendable. I called the police. I gave them names, descriptions, everything I remembered. But there was little they could do. Marcus, or Frank as I later discovered, was a ghost. No criminal record under that alias. No traceable address. And every time I tried to explain what had happened at the duplex, my story sounded unbelievable. Who would believe a desperate delivery driver had stumbled into a murder scene orchestrated by a shadowy figure online? Months passed. I stayed under the radar. I moved, changed jobs, and avoided anything that resembled a delivery task. But the memory haunted me. I remembered the blood, the metallic smell, the man in the leather jacket, and the way the box felt heavier than anything it should have been. That sensation, the weight of death, stuck with me. Then, one evening, I got a call. No number, just a voice, low and deliberate. "You're smart. You figured out too much, but we're patient. Don't get in the way." I hung up immediately, but the dread settled like a stone in my chest. They were watching. They always had been. I realized I couldn't run forever. If I wanted to survive, I needed to confront the truth. I contacted Alicia, the former employee who had first warned me about Frank's past. She connected me with others, former couriers, delivery drivers, anyone who had been involved. Together, we began documenting everything, gathering proof, filing reports with law enforcement. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The packages were a front for illegal activities, violent transactions, and intimidation. Every driver who refused or questioned the task disappeared, or ended up threatened. It culminated in a sting operation months later. I watched from a safe distance as the authorities moved in on the next delivery, intercepting the boxes before they reached the intended victims. Marcus, or Frank, was finally arrested at a motel near the state line, caught with incriminating evidence: boxes, ledgers, surveillance footage, and worse. Brandon's blood, preserved as a grotesque trophy, was found in his car trunk. Justice had come, but the memories didn't fade. Even now, years later, I flinch at a delivery request, a brown box, or a message from an unknown number. I know how close I came to being another body in the back of a duplex, unremembered, disposable. I have nightmares of that metallic smell, of the weight of a box in my hands, and of the leather-jacketed figure whose calm, measured gaze could freeze you in place. I never work nights again. I stay away from online gigs, from strangers offering easy money. I tell myself I survived by luck, by instinct, and by the courage of a few people who helped bring Frank to justice. But some nights, I still wake up sweating, heart racing, wondering if I left the lights on in my old apartment, if the shadowy eyes are still out there, waiting for the next delivery. I'll never forget the night I realized something at Burger Crown wasn't right. I was 17, working my late shift on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of place that stays open until 2 a.m., drawing in truckers, college kids, and all the weirdos who only come alive after dark. My parents weren't thrilled, but we needed the money. Mr. Hoffman, the franchise manager, always promised he'd walk me to my car after closing. That soft, grandfatherly voice of his, those thick glasses that made his eyes look unnervingly large, it all made him seem harmless. Too harmless, maybe. It was early September, the air heavy and still, like a storm waiting to arrive but never quite coming. I kept checking the windows, half expecting rain, half hoping someone would come in so I wouldn't feel so alone in that half-empty, flickering fluorescent hell. There were rules at Burger Crown, unspoken but clear. Never enter Mr. Hoffman's office when the door was closed. Don't ask about the freezer in the basement. And if he offered a ride home, always say no. Janet, the oldest employee, had a way of giving you a look that froze your tongue if you asked too much. That night, I was on shift with Brandon, a skinny 17-year-old who'd been working there a month. He had this nervous tic, cracking his knuckles every few minutes, and the sound echoed through the empty dining room. Around 11 p.m., he mentioned something strange. He'd seen Mr. Hoffman's car parked behind the dumpsters earlier. That was odd because Hoffman always parked by the front entrance under the bright manager sign. Brandon said he'd found something weird in the office files the previous week but wouldn't tell me. His tone was urgent, whispery. He wanted to show someone. I told him to forget it. None of it mattered. Minimum wage was enough stress without poking into mysterious files. But Brandon had this obsession with doing the right thing. His dad was a cop in another state, and he'd grown up thinking you always report things that seem off. I admired that about him, but I also feared it. Sometimes curiosity is deadly. The dinner rush had quieted down. Only truckers and a few college kids lingered, nursing coffee or late-night nuggets. Janet left at 11:30, leaving me, Brandon, and Roger, the cook, who barely spoke English. Around 11:45, Brandon went outside to take out the trash. The back door was propped open because the AC was broken again, the fryer heat suffocating. I could hear him talking, but the words were muffled. Then, silence. Minutes ticked by. I called his name. Nothing. Roger just kept scraping the grill, oblivious. I stepped outside. Brandon's phone lay on the asphalt, the screen smashed, keys scattered a few feet away. No Brandon. The security camera that might have caught something had been spray-painted black weeks earlier. Mr. Hoffman had promised to fix it. He never did. I brought Brandon's belongings inside, telling myself he'd probably wandered to the front. But when I tried calling him from the restaurant line, the phone buzzed in my hand. That's when I noticed the dark, dried blood on his keychain. A few drops, almost black. My stomach dropped. Then came Mr. Hoffman, jingling his huge keyring, appearing almost out of nowhere. His soft, concerned voice made my panic feel like a misunderstanding. "Where's Brandon, dear?" he asked, genuinely worried, or convincingly so. I showed him the phone and keys, mentioned the blood. His face blanked for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "He probably went home sick. Kids do that sometimes," he said. It didn't make sense. His truck was still in the lot. His words made me feel stupid for worrying, that familiar trap of trusting appearances. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. By morning, Brandon's body was found in the ravine behind the shopping complex, about half a mile from Burger Crown. He'd been beaten, likely with a metal pipe, around the time he'd gone out to the dumpsters. Detectives were at my door by 6 a.m. They asked about everyone: co-workers, angry customers, enemies. When I mentioned Mr. Hoffman's presence after midnight and his weird explanation, the detectives exchanged a look that made my chest tighten. Detective Rivera, sharp-eyed and gray-streaked, asked me to repeat what Mr. Hoffman said about calling Brandon's roommate. The catch? Brandon lived alone. Suddenly, I became the prime suspect. My fingerprints were on Brandon's phone and keys. I was the last person to see him alive. Security footage inside the restaurant showed me pacing, looking distressed. Even employees I trusted seemed to turn against me. Janet claimed I'd been troubled lately. Other co-workers remembered arguments I'd never had. Mr. Hoffman even suggested it subtly, that I'd had issues with Brandon. A narrative was forming, and I was trapped in it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Brandon had been trying to warn me about something in the files, and now he was dead. The fear of Mr. Hoffman, of what he was capable of, gnawed at me. But I couldn't just sit there. I needed answers. I couldn't wait for my lawyer to tell me to stay quiet. I had to know the truth. Brandon had tried to warn me, and now the burden of that knowledge pressed on me like a vice. I started digging. Former employees, old co-workers, anyone who might have seen something strange. Most ignored my messages, but one woman, Alicia, who had worked there years ago, responded. Her message was long and chilling. Mr. Hoffman wasn't who he claimed. His real name was Frank Gilmore, and he had a criminal past. Assault and fraud convictions from Kansas. She sent screenshots of news articles, and even a mugshot. The resemblance to the soft-spoken manager I'd trusted was terrifying. Alicia's story was familiar. Girls reporting strange behavior, unwanted attention, or harassment, and suddenly being accused of theft or fired. Other ex-employees chimed in. Patterns emerged. The smiling, gentle man everyone thought was harmless had been systematically preying on employees, hiding behind his managerial authority. The breakthrough came when I remembered Brandon's cryptic mention of the basement freezer. I returned to the restaurant one early Saturday morning, knowing Roger would be there for his weekly deep clean. I found him and gestured toward the basement. His eyes widened ever so slightly, but he unlocked the door. The concrete basement smelled of mold and old meat. Behind the freezer, I discovered 3 filing boxes wrapped in plastic. Inside were years of twisted records. Employee files weren't normal. They were dossiers, photos taken without consent, schedules, addresses, notes about habits, and family members. My own file was there. Photos of me walking to my car at night, detailed notes about routines, times I'd clocked in, my commute. Brandon's file, however, was different. The files he had questioned, the ones that had gotten him killed, copies of his job application, Emails where he had inquired about background checks. Nothing else. It became clear why he'd disappeared that night. I snapped photos of everything, hands shaking so violently I had to retake many shots. Just as I was replacing the boxes, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Mr. Hoffman was there, calm, khakis and polo, smiling that same unsettling smile. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. "Smart girls always figure things out." He blocked the stairs, his presence suffocating. He spoke about Brandon as if he'd been managing a scheduling problem, not killing someone. Brandon hadn't understood the rules. He'd been given a choice. Brandon had tried to run, tried to scream, but the highway noise covered it all. Then he looked at me, and I understood. I had the same choice now: forget what I'd discovered or face consequences. I froze. Panic roared in my chest. Then Roger appeared at the top of the stairs with the biggest kitchen knife in the restaurant. His eyes were steady, unafraid. In a split second, Mr. Hoffman shoved past him and ran through the kitchen. Within minutes, sirens screamed outside. Roger had called the authorities, creating the illusion of a fire to flush him out. Days later, Mr. Hoffman, Frank Gilmore, was arrested at a motel near the state line. In his car, authorities found Brandon's blood on a tire iron he'd kept as a trophy. Courtrooms, testimonies, and a long, grueling trial followed. I recounted the night shift, the hidden files, and the careful, calculated manner in which he'd manipulated and hunted employees. He got life without parole. The restaurant shut down permanently. Former employees came forward with their own horror stories. Settlements were paid, and a dark chapter of deception and abuse came to light. But the nightmares stayed. I still see his gentle smile behind thick glasses, the same one he used to lull everyone into trust. I still wonder if Brandon would have survived, if anyone had believed him that night. And I can never step into another late-night shift without feeling the shadow of that calm, terrifying presence.